Right. Well, thank you very much. So it's a very broad topic. So what I've tried to do is, and you're also probably quite a broad church as an audience. So what I've tried to do is talk about what are the things that we're all going to be faced with as a society, then drill down into what things can technology do to face and fix some of those challenges, and then on into what does that mean for the kind of things we're going to be doing day to day. Just to show you, I've always been fascinated by the impact of technology on people. So when I did my final year degree project, I was asked, how do we stop making more holes in people when they go into hospital? Because if you're an infirm person and you go into a hospital, the more times you make holes in people, the more you've got risk of infection. So how can we pick up bodily traces without making more holes in people? And so what I did was I invented a thing called a fiber optic photoplethysmograph. It's, if you've ever been in hospital or one of your relatives, they put a clothes peg on your finger, that's effectively a fiber optic photoplethysmograph. It comes from photo meaning light and plethys meaning blood. So it picks up, and this is my actual degree project picture of the design, and these are actually the blood signals. And you can today put a counter on these and get your heart rate, and guess what? The same technology is in all Fitbits. So it's my contribution to society because I didn't patent it. So I'm still here. I'm still here. Am I bitter? Of course not. Then I worked for about 33 years in HP and then HPE. I became the European head of innovation for about the last 12 years. And as part of that, I built 2 executive briefing centers and advised boards of directors. And I was the spokesperson across Europe for the research labs. So I've been kind of advising boards on this stuff for a while. Then I left in August because it's a long time to work for one company. And people said, well, are you not going to still continue to do this sort of thing? So I thought, well, hell, why not? Hence, I'm here today. So, where are we? That one. So what are the things we're all dealing with as on the largest possible scale? And the first thing is urban migration. As of today, 54% of the entire planet's population live in a city. 54% today. By 2050, if we roll that forward, we're going to have 68% of everybody in the planet living in a city. And why are they moving into cities? Because you have access to food, it's safe, there's jobs, there's education. And so that's bringing people in from all over the globe to displace people from global communities. Interestingly, I saw a statistic yesterday, 90% of the gross domestic product of the entire globe is generated in cities. So cities are something that we absolutely have to have quite a big focus on going forward. We have an aging population. Another frightening statistic yesterday. By 2027, 23% of the UK will be over 65. So, when you tend to start hitting various kind of long-term health problems. At that point, £7 out of every £10 given to the NHS will be treating chronic disease, long-term, uncurable diseases. So boy, do we have an opportunity as a society to start inventing new kinds of treatments, new kind of medicines. And obviously what the government would like to do is to keep people healthy as opposed to fixing broken people. But that's hard because as a society, we don't like being told what to do. We don't like being told what to eat. We don't like being told how fast to drive, given the announcements yesterday. But it may be in our interest, and I'm sure there's going to be some arbitrage going forward. Resource contention. We're going to start running out of things, and that's things like fresh water, that's things like food, but also at the other extreme, rare earth elements. These are the tiny, tiny pieces of trace element chemicals and minerals that are used inside computers, inside mobile phones, to do the really complicated electronics that we need. They're also used in battery technologies to make sure your electric vehicles keep running. So all of these are, in quite constrained parts of the world, not easy to get to down a motorway, but also a lot of them are in very unstable political areas. So this whole idea of resource contention, I think, is going to become key. And if you throw into the mix climate change, that's going to have enormous impacts. 70% of the world's cities are built on the coast. And the reason was that cities started as trading ports. And then people grew from there, because that's where most of the people arrived. So many, many cities, 70% in the world, are near water. I've been on a high tide walking along Queen Elizabeth Walk in London, and on a high tide with a surge, there's about a meter between where you walk and the height of the tide in the Thames. So with climate change, things like sea levels rising are going to have a big impact. The other impact is the displacement of people. Some people are barely able to make food where they are today. With climate change, that's going to make it even more difficult, to the point that they may be forced to move. Now, that's hard enough for them, but they're going to move into places occupied by other people who already have their own challenges. So there's going to be a lot of conflict and tension there that, as a society, we need to resolve. Back to the point Will made earlier, the rise of the digital native. People around sort of 2022, like my sons, they are not loyal at all in the way I'm loyal. I'm too old to change things like a bank. You know, my kids will change bank at the drop of a hat. They'll change every utility provider at the drop of a hat. They've got systems that change their bills for them. So they're a very, very different beast than I am. They use social media to my distraction, but the difference is they use it to get value out of it, whereas I would use it necessarily to talk to friends about going on a walk or something. An extreme part of that, before my son went to university, he ended up being a nightclub promoter in Reading. They said anyone who books through his Facebook account actually will pay you money. And he ended up making about £70 a week originally going to the nightclub. What was the value exchange in that? Well, if you booked through his Facebook page, you got a litre of vodka and you got somewhere to put your coat or handbag. You know, true value if you're in a student world. So he ended up originally going to a nightclub, being with his friends and being paid. And eventually he decided, I don't even have to go, I'll just get paid. So who would have thought there's a job amortizing your own Facebook account to things? So it's a different kind of transaction. As companies, we need to understand that these people don't want to sit at the end of a dumb terminal and wait 30 minutes for an answer about anything important. They've grown up on a mobile phone. They've grown up on Google. Many of you people here have grown up on Google. They expect an immediate answer. How can it possibly take this long to get this answer from inside a company of this size? You know, that's the question we need to ask. They want interesting work to do, and they want to continuously be stimulated to come up with new ideas and propagate those ideas. We live in an increasingly connected world. You know, I'm so old I can remember having dial-up broadband at about 1,200 bits per second. My children now argue that 64 megabits per second isn't enough, and why is this video occasionally sort of failing? So it's a very connected world. Going out as we look forward, though, cars are increasingly going to be connected. And I don't mean cars being connected in terms of, oh, you know, you can get a new radio station patch. We're going to be talking about connecting cars to things that control the control plane of the car. So that's a very, very different opportunity, very different spread risk, if you like, as well. And then as we get out into cyber-physical systems, we're going to see the deployment of ever-increasingly capable edge analytics and ever-increasingly capable sensor systems to understand what's happening. As we get more and more value created in an organization, and if you're a public company, you have to declare how much that value is worth, bad people look at that, see what it is, and try and find a way in. They normally get in through something like a phishing attack. Once they get in through the phishing attack, they will trawl around and either try and get into your systems and then threaten you with taking the systems down, or they might try and extract intellectual property without you knowing it. Either of those things. And we're seeing an erosion of trust. Notwithstanding our excitement in Westminster at the moment, in general across the world, we are losing trust in things that we used to have faith in. Food supply chains, governments, financial institutions. And that's driving new kinds of behaviors and new software models that says, can we have a new kind of software that isn't owned by one person who could be compromised and then do kind of nefarious things to us? If we look at where technology is now, there's a huge focus on digital twins. A digital twin was a sort of original term coined by somebody like NASA, and it's about how we model very complicated systems. It could be a city, it could be a satellite, it could be whatever you want. And now, when I say a model, some people think about computer-aided design. Here's a pretty picture in software of this thing. No, this is far more complicated than that. This is a living, breathing representation of all the parameters that will affect the system in the real world. And you can then say, given this system, if we put these inputs in, how does it change? And you can do that on the software model, and you've got a very, very capable answer that might actually happen in the real world. So they use it a lot for testing things like cars, for railway stocks, airplanes, that kind of thing. Going forward, though, we're going to start feeding in real-time inputs from these distributed sensors into the models. So you can then say, given our ideal version of what should happen today, and given all these sensor readings that are coming in, what does that mean? What's going to happen? What do we think is going to happen? Smart cities is a big focus area. The Mayor of London recently met the head of smart cities in Finland to talk about how do we make cities better. If you've ever been above ground at the moment trying to get anywhere in London, it's quite a chore. And so how do we make cities better in terms of both transport flow, in terms of the access to connectivity, the speed of your broadband, everything you need? And the thing you need to remember is your cities are competing for people. They need the best industries to come in and create the best jobs for the brightest people, because then the brightest people will come in, and that creates vibrancy and expanding opportunity for everybody. And this is a huge one. So cognitive systems is probably one of the biggest areas that's going to affect all of us over the next few years. So cognitive systems is machine learning, AI, artificial intelligence. And you might think, well, that doesn't affect me at all. When would I ever come into contact with AI? Well, every time you use a natural language processor, every time you search for an image in a search engine, etc., you'll come into contact with AI systems that are breaking tasks down. A recent report I read said that 60% of all work that we do today will be affected by AI to some extent over the next 10 years. 60% of all the work we do could be affected by AI. Now, it won't all go away, but there'll be significantly increased proportions that do. What kind of things is AI good at today? It's very good at very structured, procedural, and process-based work. Where does that kind of work happen? Well, it happens in law. We have case law in this country, which means if you know what the topic is and you know what the previous cases are, you can infer what the next answer might be. It happens in medicine. There are reasonable processes we go through consistently. So AI is going to have an enormous impact across all of us as we go. To show where we are with this, in 1995, we beat the world's best player of checkers using a computer, in 1995. About a year and a half later, we beat Garry Kasparov with an IBM computer at the time, playing chess. In about 2016, we managed to beat the world master at Go. Go is a kind of Asian game, very, very complicated. I can't remember if the exact field. I think it's something like 10 to the power of 171 combinational moves in Go. And we managed to beat that using computers. Now, all of those are great things, but actually, you know what pieces are on the board. You know the rules of the game. You can see what your opponent's done, and you can see what you're doing. So that's called a complete informational system. You know what's there, and you know what the rules are. So you can predict forward a lot of times, you can work out. So what's an example of an incomplete system? Well, think about poker. In poker, the computer doesn't know who's got which cards. Equally, you might be lying about the cards you've got, saying you've got cards or saying you haven't got cards. So that's an incomplete system. So in my previous company, we modeled that as a game of poker. We played the top 5 poker players in the world, and they said, how's it going to go? And we had some imaginary money, and we lost about $700,000. Fortunately, it was imaginary money. But learning from that and tuning the algorithms and understanding the bits that were missing, we came back a year later, and they beat everybody. And we've got about 1.3 million pounds, or dollars as it was then. So all the time, these algorithms are getting more and more tuned, more and more appropriate. And so there was an experiment done very recently in China. They took the best 20 brain cancer specialists in the country and said, go and look at these images and find out what you think. They took an AI system, which they've been working on and training. And it turned out the system is now just about 90% accurate, which is the same as the real people, who are top-notch people in their field. So we're not saying here that AI is going to mean those people aren't needed, but actually you could triage a whole load of other people and surface the real problems to those that need to know, or you could find it earlier in a much lower cost envelope. And that's going to be kind of, I think, really important. So cognitive systems are going to be absolutely key to what we do next. So keep your eye on AI. But to do this, we're going to need new computer architectures. Anyone here heard of Moore's law? Okay, so Moore's law was kind of originally framed by a guy called Gordon Moore, co-founder of Intel. he said, if we chuck more and more transistors at a computer, it's going to go faster, isn't it? And it did. It was almost linear for years. But about the late 90s, it started to tail off. And now we can't get ever more power out of a system just by throwing more transistors at it. There are other bottlenecks. So we need new kinds of computer architectures. So in-memory is one. Rather than having all your data on disks distributed around the organization, load it all up into memory. And when I say memory, we're not talking about the memory in your desktop. We're talking about up to an exabyte of memory. Now, an exabyte is 10 to the power of 15 bytes of memory. It's a very big number, and so you can't fit that in your pocket. That kind of memory has to all be connected together with fiber optics. But that's the scale of things we're thinking about to try and deal with these new simulations. And if you think about weather prediction, what's going to happen with the weather in 3 days' time? If you do that over 25 kilometers, it's a moderately complex task. If you do that over 2 meters, it's a really, really complicated task because of all the parameters that you need to deal with. So we need ever more compute power. Neuromorphic is a new compute processing technique, particularly tuned towards things like AI, so we can do those things faster and faster. And then over time, perhaps there'll be the application of quantum computing, but that's quite a way away yet. So we need more and more computer power because we need to know what's happening, and we need to know in near real time so we can respond. There's no point in knowing in a smart city something happened 3 days ago and trying to clear up the mess. We've got to go from the kind of hindsight, where most companies run today, to insight, which is got to be where we'd like to be, to foresight, which is what might happen given what we know about the real world, and are we prepared for it? Doing scenario planning, things like that. Autonomous vehicles are going to be around us. We changed the law about 2 years ago. Autonomous vehicles are on the roads around London and Hemel Hempstead and Bristol. We've also got chained lorries. By chained, I don't mean physically. There's what's called a platoon of lorries. There's a driver in the first one, and the other 3 follow on behind using electronics. So autonomous vehicles are coming. I had a lovely conversation with some of the military, and they were saying the biggest weakness in some of these flying things is the pink squidgy thing in the front seat, because that means it limits how fast the plane can turn. It has to be slightly bigger. You need air and all kinds of things to keep the pilot there. So could we have different kinds of things in the future? Absolutely. And robotics is going to start to make an increasing impact on us all. That's not necessarily a robot as in a humanoid like me. This could be, if you look at things like biomimetics, that's the study of animal movement and how you make a robot that delivers that. You can now have robot snakes. You can have robot butterflies. You can have robot all kinds of different things. Some of these work independently. Some of them collaborate amongst themselves in what's called swarming. So all of these have major implications as to the kind of things you can do and what you'll be able to do without putting people in areas of risk which might threaten them. 3D printing. Everyone heard of 3D printing? I think it's really exciting. So 3D printing allows you to have a really good idea today, design it in a computer-aided design modeler, and print the thing out there and then. Originally, it was only in plastics, but now you can get 3D printers that will print in titanium, so you can print not just a facsimile of the final product, but you can actually print the metal product with the proper structural parameters and put it into the engine, put it into the car, and test it. So drastically reducing the amount of waste, because you don't have to, you're building the thing up, you're not cutting bits out of it. Drastically reducing the amount of raw materials moved around the world, and also drastically reducing the time to market for these new creative ideas. There's a company in the US, Icon I think they're called. They've got a robot you take on site, and it prints a 3D house. It does the foundations, then it does the walls. They come and put the roof and windows on. Average price of a house they're building today, albeit it's a kind of fairly bijou studio apartment, about $14,000. So there's hope for people who are young and in the southeast of England that at least at some point you'll be able to get a house that's made out of something that doesn't cost £1 million. And the most extreme is this, is printing body parts. So there's a group of scientists across Europe doing this, but specifically there's a group in the US who've been doing this for a while. They take what's called a scaffold. This is a biological substrate, so like a sort of supporting structure, if you like. They then dope pluripotent embryonic stem cells on it, and they can grow an actual human bladder. They then insert that into people who need a bladder, and the longest living child has been living for 11 years with the synthetic bladder inside them. They're now looking at various other areas in terms of non-functional organizations like organisms, but things like kidneys and livers are much, much more complicated. We don't understand some of the spells to make them function, although we could probably make the shape today. So lots of things to change. And then decentralized systems. One of the key areas here is things like cyber currencies, things like blockchain. The idea of a blockchain is rather than having one trusted entity who can either be good or bad over time, that actually keeps the logs of what's happening, it's distributed across a whole sea of different collaborating organizations. And they each have a copy. So there's transparency, there's the ability to follow up. No one person can attack the center and stop everything else working. So this is leading to new kinds of decentralized system architectures. So what's the challenge of this world we're in? And this is playing out on the news even as I came in today. The rise of platforms. Platforms, the kind of Googles, the Facebooks, all the rest of them. You know, when you've got the eyeballs of a third of the planet on a regular basis, you need to be quite cautious about the kind of things that happen and why it happens. There's a few things here I find intriguing. I mean, obviously there's the issues about privacy, you know, but this was the Faustian bargain. No one's going to put $1 billion into a piece of software that I can use for free. So it isn't free. It's about an exchange of value. And what's the exchange of value? I tell it more about myself and all my friends and all my relationships than I would ever have done in any other time in the past. And I trust it with impunity. All of us skip through the first 500 screens of legal and say, of course I accept, because I want the functionality. So the Faustian bargain has always been, we reserve the right to use your data because that's going to fund the platform development. So we all understood that. But we didn't understand how some of the more recent things would play out. And I think over time, there's going to be more and more sensitivity as to how these things work. The other fascinating thing is, because they're desperately trying to keep you watching, if I watch a whole series of things, and one of you watches a different series of things, and then we do the same search in one of these tools, we get different answers. And what's actually happening is increasingly, I'm being told that my own self-world image is the right one because I'm only being told things that reinforce stuff I already know. But because they want you to go back, every time you go in, you're a little bit more extreme than the stuff you read before. So if I end up in any dimension of life being slightly left of center, I don't mean politically, just left of any norm, over time when I keep watching these things, they will make them more and more and more intriguing, so I get drawn more and more this way, or the other way. Now the danger is there, if that's not properly understood, you can start partitioning society into tribes, and that's blatantly something that we don't want. So rise of platforms is a fascinating one. They are enormously powerful, they offer enormous good to loads of people, but we just need to be careful about the next steps. With AI taking on some of the jobs, with autonomous vehicles taking on jobs. In the US alone, by the way, autonomous vehicles represent 4 million people's jobs. 4 million. So if those jobs go away, what do those people do? Now, interestingly, in a study done in Paris in 2011, they said, how many jobs have gone away around Paris because of the internet's introduction? And it was about, I think, about 700,000. How many jobs have been created additionally? About 1.7 million. So there's a net enormous gain in this new technology. Anyone notice the slight challenge in that? The people who lost their jobs weren't the kind of people who could easily transport themselves into this new world. So we all need to be careful. Keep your skills current. Keep watching everything all the time, every day. And with AI particularly, we need to keep people in the loop. Everyone says, oh, AI, it takes away bias. Bullshit. AI systems are trained. And if I give the AI systems a training set of data that's completely skewed because I haven't done my stats properly, I get a completely biased computer. And I start turning people away or I end up doing different things. You know, that's okay when it's about something trivial. But if this is a really, really important thing that AI is deciding, you know, we're still going to need some people in the loop. Security and privacy. You know, these are asymmetric games. Think about security. There are about 100,000 hacks a day, probably 1 million a day going on all the time. Some of these are nation states looking for intellectual property. Some of these are basically, you know, script bunnies in their back bedroom making a name for themselves. Some of these are general criminals who do this for a day job. If I'm a defending company, like your own security people, I'm told you're a cost center. You can have a couple of people, a bit of software, but don't touch the servers and patch them because the business moans. So that's where you are as a defender. Oh, and by the way, you've got to play by the rules. Contrast that with the attacker. Well, I'm a profit center. So I can have any people, any software, I don't have to play by the rules, and I can do whatever I want. Because the more money I make as an attacker, the better I'm perceived by my management, versus, do you want to spend yet more on security? So it's a very asymmetric game. And the same in privacy. Various bits of the world watch people to try and make them more safe, but people don't want to be watched too much. There's an ongoing tension there as well. So kind of to sum this up, and if you want to remember anything, try and remember this one line. I was trying to explain to school children what's going on, and I thought, I need one line. I'm not sure it was ideal for school children, but it is one line. Technology is moving at 5x, where x is an acceleration factor. So it doesn't matter what it is, it's just a ratio. So tech is moving ahead at 5x. Social norms are moving at 3x. Because society as a whole no longer understands what technology can do. And laws are moving at half x. Because laws can't be enacted until society understands and decides what's normal. And that's going to be an ever-increasing tension as we go on. And this is playing out all around us in the news.